The winter wind howled like a wounded animal as Willow Summers trudged through the deepening snow, one hand clutching her threadbare shawl and the other protectively cradling her swollen belly. Great Bend, Kansas had never looked so unwelcoming, its windows glowing with warmth she was repeatedly denied. The baby kicked beneath her palm, a painful reminder of both her blessing and her predicament as the December night of 1879 grew increasingly treacherous. "Please," Willow begged, her voice breaking as the innkeeper at the Western Star Hotel, the fifth establishment she'd tried, shook his head firmly. "I've money enough for one night, just until the storm passes." The man's eyes flickered momentarily to her protruding stomach, then to her bare left hand. His expression hardened. "We don't have rooms available for your kind. Try the livery stable if you're desperate." The door closed in her face, sending a fresh flurry of snowflakes swirling around her boots. Willow bit back a sob. 6 months pregnant, widowed though not in the eyes of this town, and now facing a blizzard with nowhere to shelter. Her husband James had been killed by outlaws on their journey west before they could properly marry, leaving her alone with only their unborn child and the cruel judgment of strangers. Her boots crunched through the snow as she made her way toward the edge of town, hoping at least to find shelter in the livery as suggested. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the wind cut through her clothing like knives. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, as if protesting their circumstances. As Willow approached the livery, she saw a man emerging from the stable, securing his hat against the wind. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to harsh elements. His long coat whipped around his legs as he turned, revealing a weathered face partially obscured by a thick beard dusted with snow. Their eyes met across the street, and Willow quickly looked away, too exhausted and humiliated to face another rejection. She continued toward the livery, praying there would be space among the horses and hay. "Madam," the man called out, his deep voice carrying over the wind, "you shouldn't be out in this weather." Willow paused, turning slightly. "I haven't much choice," she replied, her voice barely audible above the storm. The man crossed the street in a few long strides, stopping a respectful distance from her. Up close, she could see his eyes were a striking blue against his tanned skin, and despite her circumstances, she felt an inexplicable flutter of something other than fear. "Preston Quinn," he said simply, touching the brim of his hat. "Rancher out past the creek." "Willow Summers," she replied, fighting the urge to hide her belly beneath her shawl. His gaze briefly took in her condition, but unlike the others, his expression didn't harden with judgment. Instead, a flicker of genuine concern crossed his features. "Been to every inn?" he asked, though the answer was written plainly on her face. Willow nodded, too tired to explain further. Preston looked back toward town, then up at the darkening sky. "Storm's getting worse. My cabin's warm tonight," he said, the offer hanging between them. "It's not much, but there's a fire going and it's dry." Willow hesitated. She'd learned the hard way that men's offers often came with expectations she wouldn't meet. Yet something in his straightforward gaze held no hint of impropriety, only a genuine concern that had been absent in every other face she'd encountered in Great Bend. "I can't pay much," she said cautiously. A brief smile crossed his bearded face. "Wasn't asking for payment, madam. Just seems wrong to leave anyone out in this, especially in your condition." Before Willow could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind nearly knocked her off balance. Preston's hand shot out to steady her, strong and warm even through her layers of clothing. "My horse is just here," he said, nodding toward a sturdy palomino tied nearby. "It's about 4 miles to my place. Not an easy ride in this weather, but staying here isn't an option. Another sharp pain rippled across Willow's abdomen, not labor, she knew, but her body protesting the cold and exhaustion. The thought of 4 more miles in this storm seemed impossible, but the alternative was worse. "Thank you," she said finally, accepting his offer with as much dignity as she could muster. Preston helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, his chest a solid wall of warmth at her back. He wrapped an extra blanket around her shoulders, then urged the horse forward into the worsening storm. As they rode away from Great Bend, Willow fought back tears of relief and trepidation. She was putting her trust in a stranger, a cowboy she'd just met, because she had no other choice. The baby kicked again, and she silently promised her child that somehow they would survive this night. The journey to Preston's cabin was grueling. The blizzard intensified, reducing visibility to mere feet ahead. Preston guided his horse confidently through the whiteout conditions, occasionally murmuring reassurances to both Willow and the animal. Though she couldn't make out his exact words over the howl of the wind, the deep rumble of his voice against her back provided an unexpected comfort. Willow's fingers and toes had gone numb by the time a small light appeared in the distance. As they drew closer, she could make out the silhouette of a modest cabin nestled against a stand of trees that provided some shelter from the wind. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising the warmth Preston had mentioned. "Home," Preston said simply, as he brought the horse to a stop near a small stable attached to the side of the cabin. With surprising gentleness for such a large man, he helped her down from the horse, steadying her as her stiff legs threatened to buckle. While Preston quickly tended to his horse, Willow huddled against the cabin wall, shivering uncontrollably. Minutes later, he guided her through the door into blessed warmth. The cabin was simple but tidy, a single room with a stone fireplace along one wall, a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. A bearskin rug covered part of the wooden floor, and various tools of ranch life hung from hooks on the walls. "Sit by the fire," Preston instructed, helping her to a chair he pulled close to the hearth. "I'll make some coffee to warm you from inside." Willow sank gratefully into the chair, extending her frozen hands toward the flames. As feeling painfully returned to her extremities, she glanced around, taking in more details of her unexpected sanctuary. Despite its rustic simplicity, there were touches that spoke of care: a small bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes, a quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. Preston moved efficiently around the small space, putting water on to boil and adding more wood to the fire. His movements were those of a man accustomed to solitude and self-sufficiency. "How long have you been in Great Bend?" he asked, breaking the silence as he set a steaming cup of coffee before her. "Just arrived today," Willow answered, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. "I was hoping to find work and a place to stay before." She gestured vaguely at her stomach. Preston nodded, taking a seat across from her. Town can be hard on newcomers, especially those traveling alone. There was no judgment in his tone, just a statement of fact. "I wasn't always alone," Willow said softly, feeling she owed him some explanation. "James and I were heading west from Missouri. We planned to marry properly once we reached Kansas City, but there was a robbery. He tried to protect me." She trailed off, the memory still raw. 6 months later, Preston remained silent, giving her space to continue or not as she chose. "The baby is due in March," she added after a moment. "I thought I might find work as a seamstress or cook until then, somewhere that wouldn't ask too many questions." "Great Bend isn't known for its charity," Preston said with a hint of bitterness. "But there's honest work to be found if you know where to look." The coffee warmed Willow from within, and the fire had chased the chill from her bones. For the first time since entering the town, she felt her shoulders relax slightly. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly, meeting Preston's steady gaze. He considered her question, taking a sip of his own coffee before answering. "My sister was in a similar position once," he said finally. "No one helped her when she needed it most." The simple statement hung in the air between them, revealing more about this quiet cowboy than perhaps he intended. Willow nodded, understanding that some bonds of empathy ran deeper than convention or propriety. "You can take the bed," Preston said, changing the subject. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't," Willow began to protest. "You need proper rest," he interrupted firmly but kindly. "For both your sakes." He nodded toward her belly. As if in agreement, the baby gave a strong kick that made Willow gasp and press a hand to her side. A brief smile touched her lips. Despite everything, her child was a fighter. Preston busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits. The homely smells filled the cabin, reminding Willow she hadn't eaten since early morning. When he placed a full plate before her, she thanked him and ate with an appetite that surprised even herself. They spoke little during the meal, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault, making the cabin's warmth all the more precious by contrast. After they'd eaten, Preston gathered some blankets and fashioned a makeshift bed for himself near the fireplace. "If you need anything in the night, don't hesitate to wake me," he told her. Willow nodded gratefully, too exhausted to argue further about the sleeping arrangements. She settled into the narrow bed, surprised by how comfortable it felt after her long journey. The pillow carried a scent of pine and something uniquely masculine that she found oddly comforting. As she drifted toward sleep, Willow watched through half-closed eyes as Preston added another log to the fire, his profile strong in the flickering light. For the first time in months, she felt safe. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if he could hear her over the howling wind outside. But he turned slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting in a small smile. "Rest well, Mrs. Summers," he replied softly. "Miss," she corrected automatically. "We never had the chance to marry." Preston nodded in acknowledgement. "Miss Summers, then, sleep well." As Willow surrendered to exhaustion, her last conscious thought was that fate had perhaps been kind after all, steering her to this particular cabin on this stormy night. Morning brought a transformed world. Willow woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's small windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that glittered like diamonds in the early light. Preston was already up, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast. He acknowledged her with a nod as she sat up, smoothing her rumpled dress as best she could. "Storms passed, but we got nearly 2 feet of snow," he informed her, placing a steaming cup of coffee on the small table. "Road to town will be difficult for a few days." Willow felt a mixture of relief and anxiety at this news. Relief at postponing her return to a town that had rejected her, anxiety at imposing further on this man's hospitality. "I don't want to be a burden," she began carefully. Preston shook his head. "You're not. Truth is, I could use some help around here while you wait for the roads to clear, if you're willing." "Of course," Willow agreed quickly, grateful for the chance to repay his kindness. After a breakfast of cornmeal mush with molasses, Preston showed Willow around the small property. Besides the cabin and attached stable, there was a modest barn housing several head of cattle, a chicken coop, and a small workshop where he repaired tack and tools. "It's not much compared to some of the big spreads," Preston admitted as they trudged through the deep snow, "but it's mine, free and clear." Willow could hear the pride in his voice. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely, admiring the way the cabin sat nestled against the hillside, protected from the worst of the winds. They fell into an easy rhythm over the next few days. Willow took charge of the cabin's interior, cooking meals and mending Preston's clothes while he tended the animals and cleared paths through the snow. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes reading from Preston's modest collection of books. Willow learned that Preston had come to Kansas after the war, having fought for the Union despite being from Missouri originally. He had worked on various ranches before saving enough to buy this small property 3 years ago. "My dream is to build it into something I can pass down someday," he confessed one evening, his eyes fixed on the flames. "Though I suspect that would require a family." "You never married?" Willow asked carefully. Preston shook his head. "Came close once, years back. She decided a rancher's life was too hard, too lonely." He shrugged, but Willow could see the old hurt beneath his casual gesture. "And your sister?" she inquired, remembering his earlier mention. A shadow crossed his features. "Rebecca died in childbirth, her and the baby both." The man responsible had already moved on by then. "I'm so sorry," Willow said softly, understanding now why he had been so quick to offer help to a pregnant woman in distress. Preston acknowledged her sympathy with a nod. "It was a long time ago. But I made a promise then that I'd never turn away someone in need, especially a woman in your condition." On the 4th day, the sun shone brightly, beginning to melt the massive drifts. Preston announced he needed to ride into town for supplies and to check if any mail had arrived during the storm. "Will you be all right here alone?" he asked, his concern evident. Willow assured him she would be fine. "I've imposed on your kindness long enough. Perhaps I should return with you, try to find lodging again." Preston's expression tightened. "Give it another day or two," he suggested. "Roads will be better then." He seemed reluctant to take her back to Great Bend, and truthfully, Willow wasn't eager to face that particular challenge again so soon. She nodded her agreement, and Preston rode out shortly after breakfast. Alone in the cabin, Willow set about preparing a more elaborate dinner than usual, wanting to show her appreciation for Preston's hospitality. She found dried apples in his pantry and decided to surprise him with a pie, in addition to the venison stew already simmering over the fire. As she worked, Willow found herself humming softly, realizing with surprise that she felt more at peace here in this simple cabin than she had anywhere since James's death. The baby seemed to agree, moving contentedly rather than restlessly within her. Preston returned late in the afternoon, stamping snow from his boots at the door. His face brightened noticeably when he saw Willow at the stove, and something about his expression sent a warm flutter through her chest. "Something smells wonderful," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "Venison stew and apple pie," Willow replied, pleased by his obvious appreciation. "I hope you don't mind my using your supplies." "Mind? I can't remember the last time I had pie," Preston said, placing a small package on the table. "I brought you something from town." Curious, Willow unwrapped the brown paper to find a small jar of wild honey and a length of soft blue fabric. "Mrs. Turner at the general store suggested the honey might help with sleep," Preston explained somewhat awkwardly. "And I thought perhaps you might use the fabric for when the baby comes." Touched beyond words by his thoughtfulness, Willow blinked back sudden tears. "Thank you," she managed. "That's very kind." Preston shifted uncomfortably, unused to gratitude. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing, and they both knew it. It was a gesture that acknowledged her presence in his life as something more than a temporary inconvenience, a recognition of her future and her child's. As they ate dinner that evening, Preston shared news from town. Road to Wichita should be clear by tomorrow or the day after. Sheriff Henderson said there's a stagecoach due through at week's end. The mention of departure hung between them, neither quite ready to address it directly. Did you learn anything about work opportunities? Willow asked instead. Preston hesitated. Town's pretty quiet this time of year. But Mrs. Turner mentioned she could use help at the store come spring. He paused, then added more carefully. That would be after the baby, though. Willow nodded, facing the reality of her situation. Even if she found work, managing with a newborn would be nearly impossible without help. I've been thinking, Preston said suddenly, setting down his fork. My neighbor Elias Whitaker and his wife run a larger spread about 5 miles west. They lost their housekeeper last month when she moved to Colorado. They're good people, fair employers. The position comes with a room of your own in their house. I mentioned your situation, not all the details, just that you're a widow in need of work. They're interested in meeting you. Willow stared at him, hope and gratitude warring with a strange disappointment she couldn't quite name. That's very generous of you to arrange. Preston nodded, his eyes not quite meeting hers. They'd understand about the baby. Martha Mrs. Whitaker has 7 children of her own. She'd be helpful when your time comes. It was the perfect solution to Willow's predicament, yet somehow it left her feeling hollow. The thought of leaving Preston's cabin, of no longer sharing quiet evenings by the fire, or seeing his gentle smile when she served a meal, he particularly enjoyed these realizations, affected her more deeply than she was prepared for. I could take you over there day after tomorrow if the weather holds, Preston continued, seemingly unaware of her inner turmoil. Yes, that would be fine, Willow agreed automatically, forcing a smile. Thank you for thinking of me. Later, as she lay in Preston's bed, which she had continued to insist she should relinquish, to no avail, Willow placed a hand on her rounded belly and whispered to her unborn child. We'll be all right, she promised. This is a good opportunity. But as she drifted to sleep, it wasn't the Whitaker farm she pictured, but this small cabin, with Preston moving quietly around the firelit space. The next day passed too quickly for Willow's liking. She found herself memorizing small details of the cabin, the way sunlight slanted through the west window in late afternoon, the creak of the 3rd floorboard from the door, the collection of carved wooden animals on the shelf that Preston had made during long winter evenings. Preston spent much of the day outside, returning only for meals. His quiet demeanor seemed more pronounced, his conversation limited to practical matters. Willow wondered if he was simply eager to reclaim his solitude after having an unexpected guest for nearly a week. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Willow worked on sewing a small gown from the blue fabric Preston had given her. Her stitches were neat and even, a testament to years of practice. You're skilled with a needle, Preston observed, whittling a piece of wood in his hands. My mother taught me, Willow replied. She believed every girl should know how to sew, cook, and manage a household. She taught you well. The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. What are you making? She asked, nodding toward his hands. Preston hesitated, then held up a small, partially carved figure, a cradle toy, for the baby. His cheeks colored slightly beneath his beard, Willow's heart constricted at the gesture. That's very thoughtful, she said softly. Something to remember this place by, he added, returning his attention to the carving. The implication that she would soon be gone, that this brief interlude of shared domesticity was ending, hung heavy in the air between them. Willow wanted to say something, though what exactly, she wasn't sure, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, they sat in companionable silence until the fire burned low. When Preston finally rose to bank the embers for the night, Willow gathered her courage. "Preston," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned, his expression questioning. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth, a longing quickly suppressed. "You're welcome, Willow," he replied, using her given name for the first time. The sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. Morning arrived with reluctant brightness, sunlight struggling through clouds that promised more snow before day's end. Willow dressed carefully in her cleanest dress, determined to make a good impression on the Whittakers. Preston had already gone out to saddle the horses when she emerged from the cabin, a small bundle of her meager possessions in hand. He returned leading 2 horses, his Palomino and a gentle-looking mare. "Borrowed Daisy here from the Whittakers yesterday," he explained. "Thought you'd be more comfortable riding her than sharing a saddle in your condition." The thoughtfulness of the gesture was typical of the man she'd come to know over the past week. Willow thanked him as he helped her mount, his strong hands careful and respectful at her waist. They rode in silence for the first mile, the horses plodding steadily through the diminishing snow. Willow's thoughts were a jumble of practical concerns about her new position mixed with an inexplicable sadness at leaving Preston's cabin. "The Whittakers' place is bigger than mine," Preston said eventually, breaking the silence. 300 acres, mostly cattle. House has 4 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. You'll be comfortable there." "It sounds wonderful," Willow replied, though her tone lacked conviction even to her own ears. Preston glanced at her, then back at the trail ahead. "They're good Christians, won't hold your situation against you." Willow nodded gratefully. Her unmarried status and pregnancy had made her a target for scorn in too many places already. "I told them you were recently widowed," Preston continued. "Figured that was close enough to the truth and simpler." "Thank you," she said softly, appreciating his protection of her reputation. They crested a small rise and Preston pointed ahead. "That's their place, just beyond that stand of cottonwoods." Willow could make out a large farmhouse and several outbuildings in the distance. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, exactly the sort of stable environment she needed for herself and her child. So why did the sight fill her with such reluctance? They were halfway down the slope when the baby gave a particularly strong kick, followed by a sharp pain that made Willow gasp and clutch her abdomen. Preston was instantly alert, reining his horse closer to hers. "What is it?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Just a strong movement," Willow assured him, but as she spoke, another pain gripped her stronger than before. Preston's brow furrowed with worry. "Let's rest a moment," he suggested, guiding their horses toward a sheltered spot beneath the cottonwoods. He helped Willow dismount and settle on a fallen log, watching her with obvious concern as she breathed through another wave of discomfort. "These seem too strong to be just movement," he observed, his voice tight with worry. Willow placed both hands on her belly, feeling the muscles tighten beneath her touch. "It's too early," she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "The baby isn't due for another 2 months." Preston knelt before her, his blue eyes steady on hers. "Could be false labor," he suggested. "My sister had that twice before her time came." Willow nodded, clinging to that hope, but another contraction gripped her, stronger than the last. She couldn't suppress a small cry of pain. "We need to get you back to the cabin," Preston decided. "It's closer than the Whittakers, and you're in no condition to meet new employers right now." "But what about the position?" Willow protested weakly. "It'll keep," Preston assured her. "Your health and the baby's come first." With gentle efficiency, he helped her back onto Daisy, then mounted his own horse and led them both carefully back the way they had come. Each jolt of the horse's movement sent fresh waves of pain through Willow's body, but she bit her lip and endured, focusing on Preston's broad back ahead of her. By the time they reached the cabin, Willow was pale and trembling, the contractions coming regularly every few minutes. Preston lifted her from the saddle as if she weighed nothing, carrying her inside and straight to the bed. "I'll fetch help," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Mrs. Oates at the next farm is a midwife." "Don't leave," Willow pleaded, gripping his hand as another contraction seized her. "There's no time." Preston's expression was one of pure terror, but he nodded, accepting the reality of their situation. "Tell me what to do," he said, his voice steadier than his eyes. "Water," Willow gasped between contractions. "Clean cloths and your cleanest knife." Preston moved with surprising efficiency, gathering the items she requested. His hands shook slightly as he placed them beside the bed, but his voice remained calm as he spoke words of encouragement. What followed was a blur of pain and effort for Willow. Preston stayed by her side, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, supporting her back when she needed to change positions, and speaking gentle words of encouragement that anchored her through the worst of the pain. Hours passed. Outside, the promised snow began to fall, isolating them further from any possible help. As twilight darkened the windows, Willow's labor intensified. She cried out, clutching Preston's hand with strength that surprised them both. "You're doing wonderfully," he assured her, though the fear in his eyes betrayed his confidence. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Willow Summers." Somehow, hearing those words from this quiet, steadfast man gave Willow the courage to continue when her strength seemed depleted. With a final, tremendous effort, she brought her child into the world, a tiny, red-faced boy with a shock of dark hair who announced his arrival with a lusty cry that belied his early arrival. Preston's face transformed with wonder as he carefully cut the cord as Willow instructed, then wrapped the infant in the soft blue fabric that had been intended for his first gown. "A son," he said softly, placing the bundle in Willow's trembling arms. "You have a son." Tears streamed down Willow's face as she gazed at her child, James's child, now safe in her arms despite everything. "He's perfect," she whispered. Preston nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "What will you call him?" Willow looked up at this man who had saved both their lives with his kindness and courage. "William," she decided. "William James Summers." Preston smiled, a full, unreserved expression she hadn't seen before. A strong name for a strong boy. Later, after tending to Willow's needs and ensuring both mother and child were comfortable, Preston collapsed into the chair beside the bed, exhaustion etched on his features. "Thank you," Willow said softly, cradling her sleeping son. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "But it didn't," Preston interrupted gently. "You're both safe. That's what matters." As night deepened outside and snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence, a new feeling settled in the cabin, a sense of rightness, of completion, that neither had expected to find. The days following William's birth passed in a haze of exhaustion and wonder for Willow. Despite his early arrival, the baby proved remarkably robust, with a healthy appetite and strong lungs that he exercised frequently during the night. Preston was a constant, steadying presence. He tended the fire, prepared simple meals, and cared for his livestock, all while finding time to check on Willow and the baby throughout the day. To Willow's surprise, he showed no signs of impatience for them to leave, nor did he mention the Whittakers again. On the third day, when Willow was feeling stronger, she broached the subject herself. "We've disrupted your life long enough," she said as Preston brought her a cup of tea. "As soon as the weather clears, we should continue to the Whittakers as planned." Preston set the teacup down with deliberate care. "There's no rush," he said, not meeting her eyes. "The position will keep, and you need time to recover." "But we've already imposed on your generosity for over a week," Willow protested. Preston finally looked at her directly. "It hasn't been an imposition," he said quietly. "Having you and William here." He paused, searching for words. "The cabin feels more like a home than it ever has." The simple admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to voice. Before Willow could respond, William began to fuss in his makeshift cradle, a drawer from Preston's bureau, padded with blankets. She lifted him into her arms, and the baby immediately quieted, his tiny hand curling around her finger. Preston watched them with an expression that made Willow's heart quicken. "He knows his mother," he said softly. "He's a blessing I didn't deserve," Willow replied, stroking William's downy head. "Every child is a blessing," Preston said, "and every child deserves a mother as devoted as you." The compliment warmed her. "And a father," she added softly, thinking of James and all that William would never know of him. Preston nodded, his expression solemn. "Yes," he agreed. "A father, too." A week passed, then another. The initial awkwardness of their situation gradually gave way to a comfortable routine. Preston expanded his daily chores to include caring for Willow and William's needs, while Willow slowly resumed household tasks as her strength returned. They rarely spoke of the future or of Willow's eventual departure. It was as if by mutual, unspoken agreement they had decided to exist in this suspended moment, neither moving forward nor backward. One evening, as Preston sat by the fire mending a bridle while Willow nursed William nearby, a knock at the door startled them both. Visitors were rare in the best weather, and almost unheard of in winter. Preston opened the door to find Elias Whitaker stamping snow from his boots on the porch. "Elias," Preston greeted him with forced casualness. "What brings you out in this weather? Checking on neighbors after that last big snow," Elias replied, stepping inside. His gaze immediately fell on Willow and the infant at her breast. She quickly adjusted her shawl for modesty, her cheeks burning. "I see your houseguest had her baby," Elias observed, his expression unreadable. "This is Willow Summers," Preston introduced her formally. "And her son, William. He arrived earlier than expected, which is why we never made it to your place that day." Elias nodded, removing his hat. Mrs. Whitaker wondered what had happened. "Position still open if you're interested, Mrs. Summers." The offer hung in the air. Willow glanced at Preston, whose face had gone carefully blank. "That's very kind, Mr. Whitaker," she began cautiously, "but I'm not sure when I'll be well enough to take on such duties." "No rush," Elias assured her. "Martha said to tell you the position will keep until spring if need be. We managed this long without help. We can manage a bit longer." Preston's shoulders relaxed slightly at this reprieve. "Coffee, Elias," he offered. The men discussed local matters while Willow settled William in his cradle and prepared a simple meal. She served them both, then excused herself to the far corner of the cabin, giving them privacy for their conversation. After Elias departed, promising to inform his wife that all was well, a strange tension remained in the cabin. Preston busied himself with unnecessary tasks, avoiding Willow's gaze. "The Whitakers seem kind," Willow observed carefully. Preston nodded. "They are. Good employers, fair people." "I should give them an answer soon," Willow pressed gently. "They can't hold the position indefinitely." Preston stilled, his back to her as he stared out the window at the snowy landscape. "No," he agreed. "They can't." Willow waited, sensing he had more to say. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling of the fire and William's soft breathing from his cradle. "Unless," Preston said finally, turning to face her, "you had a reason to stay here instead." Willow's heart began to race. "What reason would that be?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Preston crossed the room to stand before her, his blue eyes intense with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to name until now. "I'm not a wealthy man," he began. "This cabin is small, the work is hard, and the winters are long, but it's a good life, an honest one. And it's been better, immeasurably better, since you and William arrived." Willow's breath caught in her throat. "Preston, I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. "You're still grieving James, still adjusting to motherhood, and we've known each other just weeks. But I hope that in time, you might consider making this arrangement permanent." "Are you asking me to stay on as your housekeeper?" Willow asked carefully, needing absolute clarity. Preston shook his head, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth despite the seriousness of the moment. "No, Willow. I'm asking if, when you're ready and only when you're ready, you might consider becoming my wife." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned as the man who'd spoken them. "You barely know me," Willow whispered. "I know enough," Preston replied simply. "I know you're brave and kind. I know you love your son fiercely. I know you make this cabin feel like the home I've always wanted but never quite achieved on my own." He paused, then added more softly, "And I know that the thought of you leaving makes the future look emptier than I can bear." Tears filled Willow's eyes, not of grief or confusion, but of a startling, unexpected joy. "And William?" she asked, glancing toward the cradle. Preston's expression softened. "William would be my son in every way that matters," he promised. "I'd raise him as my own, give him my name, teach him everything I know." "Even though he's not your blood," Willow pressed. "Family isn't always about blood," Preston said firmly. "It's about choice, about commitment. I choose you both if you'll have me." A tear spilled down Willow's cheek. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to answer now," Preston assured her quickly. "Like I said, when you're ready." "Yes," Willow interrupted, surprising them both. Preston blinked. "Yes," a smile broke through Willow's tears. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, when the time is right, I'll marry you." For a moment, Preston seemed unable to process her answer. Then, with reverent slowness, he reached out to take her hands in his. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel obligated because of my help or pressured because of your situation." Willow shook her head. "This isn't about obligation or necessity," she assured him. "It's about finding something I never expected to find again, a good man, a possible future, a chance at happiness." She squeezed his hands. "James will always have a place in my heart and in William's life through my memories. But I believe he would want us to be safe, to be cared for, to be loved." At the word loved, Preston's expression transformed with hope. "I do," he said quietly. "Love you, I mean. I know it's happened quickly, perhaps too quickly to be believed." But Willow silenced him by rising on tiptoes to press a gentle kiss to his bearded cheek. "I believe you," she whispered, "and I'm beginning to feel the same." Preston's arms encircled her carefully, mindful of her still healing body. In that embrace, Willow felt a sense of homecoming so profound it brought fresh tears to her eyes. This man, this cabin, this moment, all of it felt right in a way nothing had since James's death. As if sensing the significance of the moment, William chose that instant to wake, his small cry bringing a smile to both adults' faces. "I should tend to him," Willow said, reluctantly stepping back from Preston's embrace. Preston nodded, releasing her with obvious reluctance. "Of course." As Willow lifted William from his cradle, Preston watched them with such tenderness that her heart swelled. This unexpected cowboy, who had offered shelter from a storm, had somehow become shelter of a more permanent kind for her heart, her child, her future. "We'll need to expand the cabin," Preston mused, his practical nature reasserting itself. "Add a proper bedroom, maybe a small nursery." Willow smiled at his immediate planning. "There's time," she assured him. "For now, this is perfect just as it is." As winter gradually yielded to spring, the small cabin witnessed a quiet transformation. Preston, energized by Willow's acceptance of his proposal, began work on expanding the structure whenever weather permitted. By March, a small additional room had taken shape, a nursery for William, who grew stronger and more alert with each passing day. Willow watched these changes with a growing sense of permanence and belonging. The cabin was becoming their home, not just Preston's, with touches of her presence throughout. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, curtains sewn from fabric Preston had brought from town, a braided rug beside the bed they now shared. They had agreed to marry in late spring, giving Willow appropriate time to mourn James while allowing their own relationship to develop naturally. To Willow's surprise and gratitude, Preston never pressed for more intimacy than she was ready to give. Their nights were spent in innocent closeness, his strong arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, William's cradle nearby. As April arrived with its promise of renewal, Preston rode into town one morning with a list of supplies for the cabin expansion. He returned late in the afternoon, his expression troubled in a way Willow had come to recognize meant something was weighing on his mind. "What is it?" she asked as he hung his coat by the door, William balanced on her hip. Preston sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Heard some talk in town," he admitted reluctantly. "About us." Willow's stomach clenched. She had known this was inevitable, a woman living with a man to whom she wasn't married, a baby whose paternity would be questioned by gossiping tongues. "What kind of talk?" she asked, though she could guess. Preston's jaw tightened. "Nothing worth repeating," he said firmly. "Small-minded people with nothing better to do than judge others." Willow shifted William to her other hip, her heart heavy. "Perhaps we should marry sooner," she suggested, "for propriety's sake." "No," Preston said, more sharply than he intended. Seeing her startled expression, he softened his tone. "I mean not like that, not because of gossip or pressure." He crossed to her, placing a gentle hand on William's dark head. "When we marry, it will be because it's right for us, not because the good people of Great Bend think it's overdue." His defiance on their behalf warmed Willow's heart, but she remained practical. "The talk will only worsen," she pointed out. "It could affect your standing in the community, your business dealings." Preston shrugged, unconcerned. "Let them talk. I know the truth of what we are to each other, and that's what matters." Later that evening, after William had been fed and settled in his cradle, Preston and Willow sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in hues of gold and crimson. The air was mild, carrying the first scents of spring fresh grass, damp earth, distant wildflowers. "I've been thinking," Preston said, breaking their comfortable silence, "about what you said earlier." Willow turned to look at him, her face softened in the fading light. "About marrying sooner," Preston nodded. "Not because of the gossips," he clarified quickly, "but because I find myself increasingly impatient to call you my wife." A smile touched Willow's lips. "Is that so, Mr. Quinn?" "It is," he confirmed, taking her hand in his. "I wanted to give you time to heal, time to be certain. But if you're ready, then I see no reason to wait until late spring as we planned." Willow considered his words, her thumb tracing absent patterns on the back of his hand. "When did you have in mind?" "The circuit preacher comes through next week," Preston informed her. "We could speak to him then, perhaps have a small ceremony the following Sunday." The suggestion brought a flutter of both excitement and nervousness to Willow's chest. Marriage to Preston would cement her place here, make this cabin truly her home, give William a father in every sense of the word. "What about the town gossips?" she asked, still concerned about how their situation appeared to others. Preston lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Let them come to the wedding if they're so interested in our affairs," he said with a hint of mischief. Nothing silences gossip like a proper invitation. Willow laughed, the sound carrying across the darkening prairie. You're a surprising man, Preston Quinn. Is that a yes? He asked, his blue eyes serious despite his smile. In answer, Willow leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, their first true kiss, sweet and full of promise. When she pulled back, Preston's expression was one of such wonder that she couldn't help but kiss him again. Yes, she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. The following Sunday, Willow stood in Martha Whittaker's guest bedroom, staring at her reflection in the small mirror with a mixture of disbelief and joy. The dress she wore, a simple creation of ivory cotton with lace trim, had been a gift from Martha, who had taken an immediate liking to Willow upon meeting her. You look beautiful, Martha declared, adjusting the small wreath of spring wildflowers in Willow's hair. Preston won't know what hit him. Willow smiled nervously. I still can't quite believe this is happening, she admitted. Martha squeezed her shoulder comfortingly. Life takes unexpected turns, dear. Sometimes the best ones are those we never planned for. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of Elias Whittaker, who had offered to escort Willow in lieu of a father or brother. The preacher's ready, he informed them, and Preston looks like he might wear a hole in the floorboards if he has to wait much longer. Willow laughed, picturing Preston's impatience. With a final glance in the mirror, she took a deep breath and turned toward the door. The Whittakers' front parlor had been transformed for the occasion. Spring flowers adorned every surface, their sweet fragrance filling the room. A small gathering of neighbors and townspeople, some whom Willow had met, others who had likely come out of curiosity about the woman living at Preston Quinn's cabin, turned to watch as she entered on Elias's arm. But Willow saw only Preston, standing tall beside the preacher, his usually weathered face clean-shaven for the occasion, his best shirt crisp and white against his tanned skin. The look in his eyes as he beheld her made Willow's heart soar. Martha followed behind, carrying William, who was dressed in a small white gown that Willow had fashioned from the blue fabric Preston had given her months ago. The ceremony itself was brief, but heartfelt. Preston's voice never wavered as he spoke his vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish Willow, and to be a father to William for all his days. Willow's own voice trembled slightly with emotion as she made the same promises in return. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston's kiss was gentle, but filled with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. The Whittakers had provided a feast, and neighbors had brought additional dishes and small gifts for the newlyweds. Even those who had come out of curiosity seemed won over by the obvious affection between Preston and Willow, and the care with which he handled little William when Martha placed the baby in his arms. Mrs. Quinn, Preston murmured when they finally had a moment alone on the porch. How does it sound? Perfect, Willow replied honestly, leaning against his solid strength. Absolutely perfect. Their return to the cabin that evening now truly, their home held a sense of rightness that brought tears to Willow's eyes. Preston carried her across the threshold despite her laughing protests, then did the same for William, declaring that both his wife and son deserved the traditional welcome. As they settled William in his cradle for the night, Preston's arm around her waist, Willow was struck by how far they had come from that stormy December night when she had been turned away from every inn in Great Bend. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Willow smiled up at him. "I was thinking about fate," she replied, "about how the worst day of my life led me to the best." Preston brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I thank God every day for sending you to my door," he said softly, "even if it took a blizzard to do it." Later, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, husband and wife in every sense now, Willow nestled against Preston's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered, speaking the words for the first time without reservation. Preston's arms tightened around her. "And I love you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You and William both, more than I ever thought possible." Outside, the prairie winds whispered secrets to the stars, and inside the small cabin, no longer lonely, no longer just a shelter but a true home, a family slept, bound together by love that had blossomed from the most unexpected beginning. 5 years later, the summer sun beat down mercilessly on the Kansas prairie, turning the landscape golden under its relentless gaze. From the shade of the expanded porch of the Quinn ranch house, Willow watched as Preston instructed 5-year-old William on the proper way to mount his pony, a birthday gift the boy had received the previous week. "Grab the mane, not just the saddle," Preston directed patiently. "That's it. Now swing your leg over, good boy." William's face shone with pride as he settled into the saddle, his small hands gripping the pony's mane as instructed. Though he didn't share Preston's blood, the boy had adopted many of his mannerisms, the same determined set to his jaw, the same careful attention to detail when learning a new skill. "Look, Mama," William called excitedly. "I did it myself." "I see that," Willow called back, smiling at her son's accomplishment. "You're becoming quite the cowboy." Preston beamed with pride as he led the pony in a small circle, one hand ready to steady William if needed. His devotion to the boy had never wavered. From the moment they'd married, Preston had been a father in every way that mattered. The sound of fussing from the cradle beside Willow drew her attention. 2-month-old Margaret Maggie, as they called her, was awakening from her afternoon nap. Willow lifted the infant into her arms, cradling her daughter against her shoulder as she continued to watch her husband and son. The past 5 years had brought changes both expected and surprising. The small cabin had expanded into a proper ranch house with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and the porch where Willow now sat. Preston's herd had grown from a handful of cattle to a respectable operation that provided a comfortable living for their family. Great Bend had changed as well. The railroad had brought more settlers, more businesses, more opportunities. The same townsfolk who had once gossiped about Willow's arrival now nodded respectfully when the Quinn family attended church on Sundays or came to town for supplies. But the most significant changes had been within themselves. Preston, once so solitary and reserved, had blossomed as a husband and father. His natural quietness remained, but it was now punctuated by laughter and warmth, especially when William climbed into his lap for an evening story, or when baby Maggie, who had her father's blue eyes, gazed up at him in fascination. For Willow, the changes had been equally profound. The desperate young woman who had trudged through a blizzard with nowhere to turn had found not just shelter but a true home, not just security but deep and abiding love. "I think that's enough riding for today," Preston announced, lifting William from the pony's back. "We need to let Thunder rest." William pouted momentarily, but knew better than to argue when it came to caring for animals. Preston had instilled in him a deep respect for all the creatures on their ranch, from the cattle and horses to the chickens that provided their eggs. "Can I help brush him down?" William asked hopefully. "Of course," Preston agreed. "That's part of being responsible for your pony." Willow smiled as she watched them lead the docile animal toward the small stable. Preston's hand rested on William's shoulder, and the boy looked up at him with obvious adoration. No one seeing them together would question their bond, blood relation or not. Maggie squirmed in Willow's arms, and she adjusted her position to better support the baby's head. Unlike William's dark hair and eyes inherited from James, Maggie had inherited Preston's coloring. Fair hair that promised to darken to honey brown, and those striking blue eyes. The dinner bell rang from the kitchen where Betsy, the teenage daughter of a neighboring rancher who helped with household chores, was setting the table for the evening meal. "Coming," Willow called, rising carefully with Maggie still in her arms. Inside, the house was cool despite the summer heat, the thick walls providing natural insulation. Willow settled Maggie in her cradle near the kitchen table, where she could watch the family while they ate. Preston and William arrived moments later, both smelling of horse and leather, their hands freshly washed at the pump outside. William climbed onto his chair, immediately launching into a detailed account of his riding lesson for Betsy's benefit, while Preston moved to Willow's side, pressing a kiss to her temple. "He's a natural," he murmured proudly. "Like his father," Willow replied with a meaningful smile. Preston's expression softened at her words. Even after 5 years, moments like these could still bring a hint of moisture to his eyes, the acknowledgement of the family they had built together, the life they shared. Dinner was a lively affair, with William dominating the conversation as usual. His 5-year-old enthusiasm for everything from his pony to the new calves in the north pasture, seemingly inexhaustible. Preston and Willow exchanged amused glances over their son's head, their communication wordless but complete. After the meal, when Betsy had gone home and William had been settled in bed with a story, Preston and Willow sat together on the porch, Maggie asleep in Willow's arms. The prairie stretched before them, painted in shades of purple and gold by the setting sun. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years," Preston remarked, his arm around Willow's shoulders. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Willow agreed. "And sometimes it feels like I've always been here, like this has always been our home." "It has," Preston said simply. "Even before you arrived, I think this place was waiting for you, for all of you." He glanced down at Maggie, then toward the window of William's bedroom. Willow leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her like a warm tide. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if there hadn't been a blizzard that night? If I'd found lodging in town instead of being turned away?" Preston considered this for a moment. "I think we would have found each other anyway," he said finally. "Some things are meant to be, storm or no storm." "Such a romantic," Willow teased gently, though she secretly cherished this side of her husband that so few others ever saw. Preston smiled, not denying the accusation. "Only with you," he assured her. As darkness settled fully over the prairie and the first stars appeared in the velvet sky, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate young woman with nowhere to turn, to a wife and mother with a home filled with love. From a solitary cowboy offering shelter from a storm, to a husband and father whose quiet strength anchored their family. "I love you, Preston Quinn," she whispered, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding night. "And I love you, Willow Quinn," he replied, his deep voice carrying the same certainty, the same devotion it always had. Inside the cradle, Maggie stirred briefly before settling back to sleep. From William's room came the soft sounds of childish dreams. And on the porch, sheltered in each other's embrace, Preston and Willow gazed out at the land that had witnessed their beginning, a beginning that had started with a storm, a desperate need, and 7 simple words. "My cabin's warm tonight." In the years that followed, as their children grew and their ranch prospered, the Quinns would face other storms, other challenges. But they would face them together, their love a shelter more enduring than any cabin, Their family, a haven built on choice and commitment rather than convention or circumstance. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled across the Kansas prairie, Preston would sometimes pull Willow close and whisper, "My cabin's warm tonight," a reminder of where they had begun and of how far they had come.